Good afternoon. I'm Molly Mantle, your librarian, and I'm so happy to be joined today by Professor Michio Kaku, a theoretical physicist and leading science communicator. He has published over 70 articles in notable physics journals and rose to notoriety for his books, which include Physics of the Future and The Future of the Mind, as well as numerous TV programs for channels including the BBC and the Discovery Channel. Professor Kaku, welcome. It's a pleasure.
Glad to be on the show. Well, after such a great introduction, I can't wait to hear the speaker myself. Well, I'm a theoretical physicist, and also I do hosting of science programs for BBC Television, the Discovery Channel. And every time I interview these distinguished scientists, I ask them the key question, the question of all questions. I ask them, is there intelligent life on the Earth? Well, I was watching the Kardashians on TV the other night, and I've come to the conclusion that nope, there's no intelligent life on this planet. But there is one question of all questions, the key question of all, and that is the universe. Is there a rhyme or reason to the universe? A principle, a paradigm, a theory that explains the vast diversity, the richness of what we see in the universe, or is it all just random and chaotic? Well, 2,000 years ago, there was a Greek philosopher, mathematician, who asked that same question. He noticed a lyre string and he plucked it. The longer the string, the lower the note. Then he went by a blacksmith shop. He saw swords being pounded. The longer the sword, the lower the note. And then he said, aha, that's it. It's music. Music is rich enough to give us the mathematics of harmonies and resonances. It's rich enough to explain the vast diversity of life in the universe. Well, the Roman Empire fell apart, and for 1,000 years, the Western world was plunged in superstition, magic, and witchcraft. But recently, that old idea of Pythagoras has come back again in the form of something called string theory. String theory says that all the vast diversity of subatomic particles are nothing but musical notes. That is, if I had a super microscope, I could see that an electron is actually a rubber band. And if I twang the rubber band, it changes frequency, and I call it a neutrino. I twang it again, it vibrates at a different frequency, and I call it a quark. I twang it enough times, and it gives you all the subatomic particles that we see in nature. So what is physics? Physics is the harmonies you can write on these strings. What is chemistry? Chemistry is the melodies you can play when these strings interact. What is the universe? The universe is a symphony of strings. And then what is the mind of God that Einstein spent 30 years of his life chasing after? The mind of God would be cosmic music resonating through hyperspace. Now, I first heard about this quest, the quest for the God equation, when I was 8 years old. When I was 8 years old, all the newspapers said a great scientist had just died. And they put a picture of his desk on the evening news, a desk with a book, just an open book. And the caption said, the greatest scientist of our time could not finish this book. Well, I was mesmerized. I was fascinated. What could be so hard that the greatest scientist of our time could not finish that book? I had to know. I went to the library. I found out his name was Albert Einstein. And that book was to be the theory of everything, an equation perhaps no more than 1 inch long that would unify all the laws of the universe. Well, I was hooked. I wanted to be part of this great revolution. So when I was 17 years old, I wanted to build an atom smasher in my mom's garage, a particle accelerator. I went to my mom and I said, Mom, can I have permission to build a 2.3 million electron volt betatron accelerator in the garage? And she said, sure, why not? And don't forget to take out the garbage. I took out the garbage. I assembled 400 pounds of transformer steel, 22 miles of copper wire, and I built a 2 million electron volt Betatron accelerator in the garage. It consumed 6 kilowatts of power. Every time I turned it in, I blew out all the fuses in the house. My poor mom, she'd come home from a hard day's work and say, "Where's the fuses?" And then she must have said to herself, "Why couldn't I have a son who plays baseball? Maybe if I buy him a basketball. And for God's sake, why can't he find a nice Japanese girlfriend? Why does he have to build these machines in the garage?" Well, because of that, a physicist who helped to build a hydrogen bomb came up to me at the National Science Fair and offered me a scholarship to Harvard. It was a very generous offer. His name was Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bombs. Well, after I graduated from Harvard, I interviewed with him, and he made a very strong pitch for me to go to Livermore National Laboratories, Los Alamos National Laboratories, and design hydrogen warheads. Well, I very respectfully declined that very generous offer because, you see, I wanted to work on something even bigger, an even bigger explosion than a hydrogen bomb, and that is the Big Bang itself, the creation of the universe. To find that God equation that set the universe into motion, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work on this great fable theory. Well, today, the leading candidate, in fact, the only candidate for a theory of everything, is based on music, the music of subatomic particles. It's called string theory. I'm proud to say that I'm the creator of string field theory, and it's not the final theory because now we believe that there are membranes involved. But my equation, string field theory, is about 1.5 inches long. That's too long. We want to get it down to about 1 inch that explains both strings and membranes and all the laws of physics. And I have a message for those of you in the audience that are perhaps listening to my lecture. If you ever find the God equation, what should you do? Well, first, tell me first. And we'll publish together, and we'll split the Nobel Prize money, because that's what's at stake, the theory of everything. Now, string theory, as I said before, is the only candidate. That doesn't mean it's correct. It just means that it's the only game in town. But some people criticize it. Anything that powerful and that controversial is bound to generate lots of controversy. Well, some people say that it predicts not just our universe, but millions of other universes. Well, let's get this straight. How many solutions of Newton's laws are there? Well, Newton's laws can explain a marble, a bowling ball, a cannonball, an asteroid, the Earth, stars, galaxies. It depends on your initial conditions. You have to tell me what I'm describing, and then Newton's laws will tell you how that object, a bowling ball, a marble, evolves with time. Any theory of everything, I don't care if it's string theory, any theory of everything has the same problem. It will also have an infinite number of solutions, just like Newton's equations have an infinite number of solutions. You have to tell me what the initial conditions are, whether it's a marble or a planet. Same thing. Any theory of everything, its solutions would be the entire universe. You have to tell me the initial conditions. And then I will tell you how it evolves with time. That means we're going to send satellites into orbit, called LISA, Laser Interferometry Space Antenna, sponsored by the European Space Agency and also NASA, to give us baby pictures of the instant that the baby universe is born. The instant when the baby universe emerges from the womb. That's what we expect to get when gravity wave detectors are placed in outer space. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find evidence of an umbilical cord connecting our baby universe to a parent universe, giving rise to parallel universes. Because you see, if string theory predicts many universes, then perhaps these universes are like a bubble bath of universes. Our universe is just one bubble, an expanding bubble, but there could be other bubbles out there, as predicted by string theory. And then when I give lectures on this, the audience always asks one question afterwards. If there are parallel universes, then is Elvis Presley still alive in a parallel universe? And the answer is, yeah, probably yes. The king is probably belting out hits, perhaps in another universe. And so we're talking about the fact that the theory is testable. 3 weeks ago, outside Chicago, history was made. We found the first crack in the standard model. The standard model is a rather ugly theory. It has 36 quarks and antiquarks, 20 free parameters that you can adjust any way you want, 3 identical generations of subatomic particles. What a mess, but it works. It describes the low energy realm of subatomic particles. But what about the high energy realm? Perhaps it will eventually break down. But for 50 years, the standard model has held sway, ugly as it is. In fact, many physicists say that it's a theory that only a mother could love. It's like taking an aardvark, a platypus, and a whale, scotch taping them together, and declaring that to be nature's finest evolutionary achievement, the most elegant, beautiful creation of evolution ever seen on the planet Earth. Well, we think there's a higher theory. And 3 weeks ago, outside Chicago, we found the first clue. The magnetic moment of the muon, which is found in cosmic rays, turned out to be different from the measured predicted quantity. This is big news. Could we be on the verge of finding a higher theory? And string theory says that perhaps there is a higher theory, the next octave. We are the lowest octave of a vibrating string. If Einstein had never been born, we would have rediscovered Einstein's theory as the lowest octave of a vibrating string. That's how powerful this theory is. Well, let me conclude on one last note. My favorite Einstein story is this. When Einstein was an old man, he was tired of giving the same talk over and over again. So one day his chauffeur came up to him, and the chauffeur said, "Professor, I'm really a part-time actor. I've heard your speech so many times, I've memorized it. So why don't we switch places? I will put on a mustache, I will put on a wig, I will be the great Einstein, and you can take a rest and be my chauffeur." Well, Einstein loved the joke, so they switched places. This went along famously until one day, a mathematician in the back asked a very difficult question. And Einstein thought, oh, the game is up. But then the chauffeur said, that question is so elementary that even my chauffeur here can answer it for you. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to give the microphone back to Molly.
Professor Kaku, thank you. And that's a great story to start with. You have just given a fantastic explanation of string theory, the closest that I've ever come to understanding physics. And you've been consistently recognized as a protege amongst theoretical physicists. You're probably one of the most famous physicists of our generation. Why do you think it's important to distill your knowledge and make your discipline so accessible to the wider population?
Well, it boils down to the key question of politics and economics. Where does wealth come from? If you talk to a politician, politicians say wealth comes from taxes. You tax Peter to pay Paul. But that's a zero-sum game. That doesn't say where wealth comes from. If you talk to an economist, where does wealth come from? It comes from printing money. That's all. You print money, you're rich. But you see, sooner or later, you got to pay off the debt. And your grandkids have to pay off the debt. I say the source of wealth is science and technology, going all the way back to Isaac Newton, who discovered the laws of motion, which gave us the foundation for the Industrial Revolution. Dynamos, generators, railroads, all of that came out of the mind of Isaac Newton. And then Faraday and Maxwell discovered the laws of electricity and magnetism, and that gave us the electric revolution, which lit up the world. And then Einstein gave us E equals mc squared, and also we have the quantum theory, which gives us transistors, lasers, all the wonders of the internet. So the wealth of society comes from science and technology. And we scientists are too modest. We have to take credit for it. We have to tell people, when you cut the budget, when you throw science out the window, you also throw prosperity and well-being out the window. And so we owe a tremendous debt to people like Newton and Maxwell and Faraday, because they're the ones who created the wealth of modern society.
I completely agree. Do you think that people without physics degrees or science degrees will ever be able to understand what you're talking about, though?
Well, not the mathematics, because mathematics is the language of Mother Nature, but to understand why it's important, whether it should be funded, political decisions about how we allocate resources, that's very important. And you see, sometimes we scientists fail in communicating that to the public. For example, in the 1990s, physicists in America wanted to build a super collider outside Dallas, Texas, even bigger than the Large Hadron Collider. But in the last day of hearings, one congressman asked the physicist, quote, "Will we find God with your equation? If so, I will vote for it." Well, the poor physicist didn't know what to say. Will we find God with this super collider? So he said, we'll find the Higgs boson. Well, you can hear the jaws hit the floor of the United States Congress. $5 billion for another goddamn subatomic particle? The vote was taken, and American physics was set back 2 generations. That's how badly particle physics was affected in the United States. Now, since then, we have asked that question. How should we have answered that question? The next time someone asks you, will we find God with your machine? If so, I will vote for it. Well, I would have said this. I would have said, God, by whatever signs or symbols you ascribe to the deity, this machine, the super collider, will take us as close as humanly possible to his greatest creation, Genesis. This is a machine that will recreate on a small scale the greatest event in the history of the universe, its birth. Unfortunately, we said Higgs boson, and American physics was set back 2 generations. Sorry about that. It means that we have to learn to, quote, sing for our supper. We have to realize that, hey, somebody has to pay the bills, somebody has to fund these things, and the public is going to have to pay for it. You know, in the old days during the Cold War, scientists in America went to Congress and said, one word, Russia. And Congress said 2 words, how much? That's the way it was during the Cold War. Those days are gone. Now scientists have to earn their keep. They have to sing for their supper. They have to convince the taxpayers to fund their exotic machines for the benefits that will inevitably come to the people.
Well, we're speaking about the Cold War. Aside from your academic endeavors, you're also well known for advocating against the misuse of science. What would you say is the most important scientific issue that we should be educating ourselves on right now?
Well, we have to realize that science is a double-edged sword. It can cut with you or it can cut against you. It depends on who wields the sword. That's why democracy should be there. But how do people in a democratic society make a decision? In a democracy, where do decisions come from? It comes from the wisdom of the masses. But they have to be educated. They have to be told what the latest scientific evidence is. And of course, there are 3 things that affect us. One is global warming. 2 is another pandemic, which is inevitable. And 3 is the question of nuclear proliferation, which of course I was part of when I was a grad student. I apologize for that lapse of memory. It's something that I would have been designing right now, hydrogen warheads, instead of working on the creation of the universe. And so we have to teach the American people and the people of the world that there's an obligation that in a democracy, people have to be educated to the point where they can make reasonable conclusions about all these things that face humanity.
Were you speaking about singing for your supper as well, and about the sort of privatization of things going forward? What's your opinion on the quest of the wealthy individuals attempting to make space tourism a monopoly and the new space race that's emerging right now?
Well, we are entering the second golden era of space exploration. But what happened to the first? What happened to the first golden era? Well, it came up against one dirty four-letter word, cost. You know, back in 1966, the Apollo space program consumed 5% of the entire US federal budget. Now, think about that for a moment. 5% of every tax dollar that the people paid for the space program, for the budget, went to the space program. That was unsustainable. Now it's, of course, 1/10 that budget. And people begin to realize that space is awfully expensive because we're in a race against the Russians. But now costs are dropping. Booster rockets are reusable. Private enterprise has brought competition to the marketplace of ideas, and costs are dropping. You know, it costs $10,000 to put a pound of anything into orbit around the planet Earth. That is roughly your weight in gold. Think of your body made out of solid gold. That's what it costs to put you into near Earth orbit. Now, to go to the moon costs 10 times that. Think about that, $100,000 per pound of anything. To go to Mars costs 100 times that, about $1 million per pound. So we had to bring down the cost. And that's what's happening with reusable rockets, competition. Costs are dropping by a factor of 2 to 5, opening up the heavens for exploration and maybe even space tourism. Now, of course, there is a downside to this. With so many rockets being launched, astronomers are complaining that it's beginning to obscure their vision of the heavens. And of course, space junk. The recent launch to the space station, initially they thought that there was a piece of space junk that might collide with it or come close to it. And they had to tell the astronauts, watch out, there's a piece of space junk headed your way. Fortunately, it turned out to be a false alarm. So there's a downside to this as well.
Do you think we should be regulating private enterprise in science?
Well, I think there has to be a balance, public-private cooperation. You see, in the early days, some technologies were simply so expensive that they had to be underwritten by the United States government or governments of the world because of the fact that it was just too costly. But eventually, these technologies were given over to the private sector, costs began to drop, competition came in, and yeah, they made billionaires too in the process, but it also made it available to the masses of people. Take a look at mass transportation, like the railroads, for example, or the airplanes. Initially, it took a jump start from governments to get things going, but after a while, private enterprise could do it more efficiently and faster. But of course, it has to be regulated because, of course, they want to do it for profit. I mean, they're not doing it for their health. These billionaires are doing it to make more billions. And so there has to be a cooperation between the public and private sector.
So we're growing up in the second golden space age, and you've already spoken about hydrogen bombs and your start in physics. How do you say the context of your own upbringing during the time of the Vietnam War affected your loyalty to physics and your dedication to your studies?
Well, I had to realize that science, like everything else, is a double-edged sword, and that I, being a physicist in the military, I served 2 years in the United States infantry. I had to come to grips with the fact that the technologies that we create can also backfire on you, and therefore they have to be democracy has to have a say in how they are carried out. This means that in some sense, we oversold some technologies during that period of time. Nuclear power was considered too cheap to meter. And then when we had 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and now Fukushima, people had to realize, now, wait a minute, there is a downside to this technology as well. Yes, it could provide us tremendous amounts of energy without carbon dioxide, but there's a possibility of nuclear contamination as well. And so we have to realize that there's a downside. In fact, Elon Musk just the other day said that he expects some astronauts will die going to Mars. Some people were shocked when he said that, but I think it was a public service because we're too used to seeing the space program as a Sunday picnic. 1% of the time we have booster rocket failures, catastrophic failures, 1% of the time. We've had 200 space shuttle missions, of which 2 blew up, killing 14 brave astronauts. That's 1% of the time. And so I think we have to be honest. We shouldn't oversell technologies to the people saying that space travel is like a Sunday picnic. We should be truthful to them and say there's a risk. But are we willing to share that burden of risk given the possible benefits that it may also give us?
What advice would you give to members of our audience who maybe want to go into science but are worried about this double-edged sword that you keep talking about?
Well, I tell young people, first of all, that they are born scientists. We're born wondering what makes the sun shine? Where did we come from? Why did the stars twinkle? We're born that way. And then we hit the greatest destroyer of scientists known to science. And that is public education. Because when you're 13, 14, 15 years of age, science is made boring. It's made memorization. It's being reduced down to facts and figures that are totally irrelevant without stressing the principles, the basic picture that drives science forward. You know, my favorite Einstein quote is that unless a theory can be explained to a child, the theory is probably useless, meaning that all great theories are not based on pure algebra and mathematics. That helps, of course, but ultimately it's the picture. It's the physical picture that drives this thing that makes all the difference, like evolution, relativity, or the quantum theory. It's the principle that drives things forward. And so we have to teach young kids that science is not just memorization. And also, of course, we have to teach kids that science can be a double-edged sword, that we have to have wisdom. But where does wisdom come from? Wisdom comes from education, so you know what you're talking about, and then clash with incorrect ideas. So I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing when people criticize certain technologies, point out certain deficiencies. We scientists should not be affronted by that. We should say to ourselves, this is good because ideas have to be tested against other ideas, or else the public will be shocked when something happens like 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, or Fukushima that upsets the entire apple cart.
It seems like a great time to talk about your new book. And before I do, I'd like to remind our audience that we'll be taking time to answer questions from you at the end. Please do submit any questions you have for Professor Kaku using the Q&A function just at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to get to them shortly. You recently published a new book, The God Equation, A Quest for the Theory of Everything, which debuted at number 6 on the New York Times bestseller list. For the people who haven't got around to reading it yet, could you give us a sort of short summary of the key concepts that you're trying to explain?
Well, the book traces the history of this great quest going all the way back to the Greeks, a 2,000-year history of the greatest minds of the human race on this quest, the greatest quest in the history of science to find the God equation. Einstein thought it would be no more than 1 inch long, like E equals mc squared. E equals mc squared unifies m, the mass of the sun, with E, the energy of sunlight, and that's why the sun shines. And E equals mc squared is only 1 inch long. We think that it's possible to unify everything. You know, on one sheet of paper, it's amazing, on one sheet of paper, you can write down Einstein's theory, plus the standard model of particles, which is supremely ugly, but still you can write the theory of almost everything on one sheet of paper. That to me is amazing. Now, whenever I write down an equation, I realize that on the other side of the Milky Way galaxy, there's probably another young alien writing the same equation, discovering the same principle with different notation, because this is universal. And so the book is about the greatest quest in the history of science, the quest to find the God equation, a unifying principle that could explain both relativity of Einstein and the quantum theory coming out of our particle accelerators. That's the quest. And hopefully we'll find it because of the fact that there are hundreds of physicists working tirelessly, studying the results of the Large Hadron Collider, the results of Fermi Laboratory outside Chicago, hundreds of physicists working to find this theory of everything. And the leading theory is string theory. And of course, it's controversial because it hasn't been tested yet. Nobel Prize winners have taken opposite points of view on the question, but I think that's a good thing. More controversy, the better, because that's where truth comes from.
Why did you decide to write this book now? How close do you think we are to finding the theory of everything?
Well, I think we have it. It's not in its final form, and enormous progress has been made in the last few years to find it, put it in its final form. And also, new data is coming in, new theories are coming out. Dark matter, for example. We now know that most of the universe is not made of atoms, contrary to almost every textbook about the universe. The universe is mainly made out of dark matter, which is invisible, and we're clueless. We're clueless to understand what dark matter is. Not to mention the fact that we have new satellites that'll probe the Big Bang itself, gravity wave detectors in outer space, giving us baby pictures of the instant of creation. Plus, the Japanese, the Chinese, and the Europeans are now thinking about a successor to the Large Hadron Collider, which may be powerful enough to test this theory. And so in the book, I mentioned 5 different ways in which this theory is testable, not with present day technology, but coming soon, we'll have the technology to test this theory. All great theories eventually get tested.
You've definitely convinced me, but what would you say to somebody who says, I'm happy, I just live my life. Why do we need a theory of everything?
Well, as I mentioned, human history changed every time we discovered the force of gravity, electricity, magnetism, the quantum theory. History changed as a consequence. Now, however, the theory is a theory of the universe. So we're not going to have better color television as a consequence of this theory, but it will answer the greatest philosophical questions about the universe. Is time travel possible? Are there other universes? What happened before the Big Bang? Is there a white hole on the other side of a black hole? All these questions cannot be decided within the framework of Einstein's theory of relativity. We need a quantum theory of relativity to make a final decision. Stephen Hawking, for example, worked tirelessly trying to figure out whether or not wormholes, gateways to other universes, are a possibility. And this could even be a very practical application because you see, the universe itself is dying. According to the second law of thermodynamics, every closed system must eventually decay, rot, fall apart, die, even the universe. One day the universe will be near absolute zero, and the big freeze will destroy all life on the earth. At that point, there's only one way to escape the second law of thermodynamics. I said in a closed system, everything runs down. But what happens if the universe is open? There's a gateway, an escape hatch, connecting our universe to another warmer universe. Then perhaps trillions of years from now, we'll be able to have the energy to open a gateway to create a dimensional lifeboat to take us to a warmer universe so we can mess up that universe as well. We'll have 2 universes to mess up at that point. But the point is that some of the greatest philosophical questions of all time cannot be answered within the current framework. This is where a theory of everything comes in. It'll answer all these questions about time travel, wormholes, other dimensions, parallel universes, white holes. All of that are within the province of a theory of everything.
Well, I think anyone in Oxford today will feel comforted by the idea of a warmer universe existing somewhere else. It's very cold. But you also recently said in an interview that within a century you think we'll make contact with aliens. What do you think that means for us as a civilization?
Well, some people email me, in fact, quite a few people email me and say, Professor, you're all wrong. You're wrong. The aliens are not there. The aliens are here because they know, because they've been kidnapped. They've been kidnapped by aliens from outer space. Well, I have a word of advice. The next time you are kidnapped by a flying saucer, for God's sake, steal something. An alien chip, an alien pencil, an alien paperweight, steal something. You know, there's no law against stealing from an extraterrestrial civilization. No law whatsoever. You're not going to go to jail, and you'll have proof that the aliens do exist. Now, if you have the unified field theory, the theory of everything, the God equation, then perhaps you can create a wormhole, perhaps a gateway. Stephen Hawking looked at this question very seriously and concluded that, well, maybe if you have enough energy, you can open a gateway and keep it stable and go across the galaxy. Then, of course, the question is, why don't they visit us? Well, if you're walking down a country road and you meet a squirrel, do you go down to the squirrel and talk to it? Well, at first you might, but eventually you get bored because the squirrel doesn't talk back to you. So I would think that if an alien can reach the Earth, they are so advanced that we're like squirrels to them and we have nothing to offer them. What are we going to offer them? Gold? Gold means nothing to them. What are we going to offer them? Power? They probably have limitless fusion power on their own. So we have nothing to offer them. So I think for the most part, they'll probably just leave us alone.
I think that's a fantastic metaphor to explain. My next question to you was going to be why haven't we made contact with aliens already? But that gives me all the answers I need. Are there any questions about the universe that, in your mind, just remain unanswerable? Do you think that we'll ever get past that?
Well, of course, the big question is what happened before the beginning? What happened before the Big Bang? Well, as I mentioned, Einstein's theory says that we live in a bubble of some sort. The bubble's expanding, that's called the Big Bang theory, and we live on the skin of this cosmic bubble. But string theory says there could be other bubbles out there. Other bubbles that when they collide or when they bud a baby bubble, that's the Big Bang. And so the Big Bang is nothing but the collision of bubbles in a bubble bath of universes. Now, for me, this was pleasing because you see, my parents were Buddhists, in which case there's only nirvana, timelessness, no beginning, no end. But I was raised as a Presbyterian. And so in Presbyterian church, there's Genesis, there's the beginning. So either the universe had a beginning or it didn't. No two ways around it, right? Wrong. You see, the multiverse idea says that our universe had a beginning. Our universe had a Big Bang, but there are other bubbles out there floating in nirvana, hyperspace, a higher dimension, and bubbles are being created all the time. Even as we speak, quantum events are creating other universes because quantum theory says once you quantize something, there's a probability it'll happen again and again. And so Big Bangs could be happening all the time in an ocean of nirvana. And what is nirvana? 11-dimensional hyperspace, a dimension beyond the 3 dimensions that we are familiar with, a dimension that's predicted by string theory.
I want to leave some time for our audience questions. Please do submit some below. So I'll just ask you one more thing. In the wake of the pandemic, we've been forced in sort of a state of introspection about our civilization rather than looking outwards. What has it been like for you personally working and writing your book during coronavirus? And what do you think the impact has been on the wider scientific community?
Well, of course, many people have suffered because of this global virus, but I think about the year 1666. That was the year of the Great Plague, which hit London. One quarter of the population of London perished during the Great Plague. But there was one young 23-year-old student in Cambridge who was sent home because of a lockdown in Cambridge. And he noticed an apple fall on his estate. He saw the moon and asked the key question which changed human history. He asked the question, if an apple falls, does the moon also fall? And then he quickly realized the mathematics of 1666 did not allow him to calculate the trajectory of the moon. So he did. His name was Isaac Newton. And so he used the time during the Great Plague of 1666 to do something very useful. He changed human history by making mechanics a possibility. All of a sudden, you could build skyscrapers. All of a sudden, you could build rockets. All of a sudden, you can build gigantic structures ahead of time, knowing exactly what all the stresses and strains there are in the object. Applied to atoms, you could also work out the theory of heat, giving rise to heat engines and the locomotive. The train is a direct consequence of Newton's laws of motion. And so Newton took the time wisely to work on a theory of almost everything, his theory of mechanics and the theory of gravity.
Dr. Kaku, thank you so much. Like I said, I'm keen to move on to questions from our audience to make sure that we have time to answer them. The first one's from an anonymous attendee who says, in your book, Future of the Mind, you state your belief that the advances in silicon computing will lead to a huge benefit to the lives of humans, as opposed to leading to a Terminator or Matrix style dystopia. What makes you think that the future will take this form?
Well, I mentioned many in that book, The Future of the Mind. I mentioned the fact that the future of the internet is BrainNet, when we will telepathically communicate with each other. Already, we've been able to decode the memories in mice. We can send small snippets of memories on the internet, memories created by mice. Now we're working on primates and eventually Alzheimer's patients. So the Alzheimer's patients will upload memories of who they are, where they live, so they don't wander in the streets, not knowing where they live. And eventually, perhaps BrainNet will replace all forms of information and entertainment. Teenagers already put a happy face at the end of every sentence. In the future, they'll put a memory, the memory of their senior date, the memory of their first kiss, whatever, on their notices on the internet. So we're going to leave the digital age and start to enter the mental age when we mentally communicate with each other telepathically, and the groundwork for that has already been laid. As I mentioned, in the future, we expect that emotions, memories, feelings will also be sent on the internet. Not to mention the fact that we will also become immortal. Our digital soul will be put on the internet, and everything about us that's digital will be systematically digitized. I would love to talk to Einstein. I would love to sit down with him and talk to him, because one day soon, somebody will digitize everything known about him and put it into a human form. So you will be able to talk to your great, 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 great grandkids, and they'll talk to you because you will be immortal and live forever in digitized form. This, I think, is inevitable, and it's happening sooner than you think.
Wow. Will Feezy asks, how do the latest developments at CERN from the MUON G2 experiment fit into your theories of string theory? Do you think we're going to have to tear up our standard model?
Well, as was mentioned, the standard model has held sway for 50 years, but it is the clumsiest theory that we've ever seen. Even the creators of the standard model admit that it's not the final theory. In the low energy realm, that is the realm that we can experience up to 14 trillion electron volts, at low energy, it does work. It's undeniable. The standard model does fit the data until this month. 3 weeks ago, shock waves were sent throughout the world. They looked at the muon. A muon is found in cosmic rays. It's like a heavy electron, and it has a magnetic moment, and they measured it. The theory predicts it should be very similar to the electron's magnetic properties, but nope, it's not. It's off. And it's now been verified. Two groups have now verified that fact. And this means that we physicists are scrambling back to our blackboards, realizing that there could be a fifth force. You know, there are four forces that rule the universe: gravity, electromagnetism, and the two nuclear forces. Four forces. There could be a fifth force found just right outside Chicago. And that fifth force could be mediated by a particle. And that particle could be a new vibration of the string. We are the lowest octave of a vibrating string. All the subatomic particles you see are vibrating in a low mode, and there's higher octaves out there. So we think that maybe, just maybe, we are witnessing the discovery of the next octave of the string. And as I mentioned, it's astonishing that if Einstein had never been born, we would have discovered relativity anyway. General relativity is a byproduct of the string. It's contained within the lowest octave of the string, even if Einstein had never been born.
You said that you'd like to speak to Einstein. One of our anonymous attendees has asked if you could assemble a table of 4 physicists, including yourself, to have dinner with. Who would you pick and why?
Well, I think the greatest scientist of all time was Isaac Newton, starting from a world obsessed with witchcraft, sorcery, magic. He was able to write down the laws of motion, which we teach to undergraduate physics majors even today, and to lay the groundwork for a theory of gravity, which unleashed the knowledge of the heavens on the earth. And I would ask him, how did you do it? I mean, in an age where people believed in sorcery and witchcraft, here's a man writing down the laws of motion that for 300 years we still teach at the university level. How did he do it? I mean, what was in his mind when he thought about these things, right? What was the pathway that led him to discover these incredible breakthroughs? That's what I would like to ask him.
Do you think we'll ever move on from Newton's laws?
Well, now we have, of course, the quantum theory and the theory of Einstein, the theory of relativity. And unfortunately, these two theories don't like each other. They hate each other. It's like God having a left hand and a right hand that constantly fight each other. Who can imagine a universe that crazy where the left hand and the right hand hate each other? But you see, that's the problem. We want to find one paradigm that unifies the left hand with the right hand so that relativity and the quantum theory vibrate in unison. Relativity is based on smooth surfaces like trampoline nets, smooth surfaces. The quantum theory chops up everything in particles. It's the opposite of the smooth theory of Einstein. So, what is the only paradigm that could unite these two? I think it is music. Music has the ability to both explain the beautiful surfaces of Einstein and the choppiness of the quantum theory.
Adam asks, I was wondering whether you'd had any thoughts on the various thought experiments that have arisen as a result of the multiverse theories, in particular the quantum immortality / quantum suicide arising as a consequence of the many worlds interpretation. Thank you.
I think what he's referring to is the fact that in the many worlds theory, people who perish in one universe could be alive in another universe, and so that Elvis Presley could still be belting out hits in a parallel universe. And the answer is yes. We physicists do seriously take this into our equations. However, and this is a big however, even though there could be parallel universes where our loved ones are still alive, we cannot easily communicate with them because we no longer vibrate at the same frequency. Think of your living room with your radio. Your radio is full of frequencies from all over the world, but your radio is tuned to just one frequency, and that's what you hear. Now, of course, everything vibrates, including atoms. So in your living room, you have the frequencies of dinosaurs, pirates, aliens, asteroids exploding. The wave functions of all sorts of things exist in your living room, coexisting with you. But why can't you enter them? Because you no longer vibrate at the same frequency that they vibrate on. So in other words, yes, it's true that your loved ones may still be alive in another universe, but you cannot communicate with them because we no longer vibrate with the same frequency as them. And you can calculate how long it will take before you can communicate with them. One problem we give our PhD students is calculate the probability that you'll wake up on Mars tomorrow. And it's a number you can calculate, the probability that you'll wake up on Mars tomorrow. But the number is, you have to wait longer than the lifetime of the universe for that to happen. So in other words, it's a very small probability that you'll wake up on Mars tomorrow, but it's possible. And it's a very small probability that you'll meet your loved ones who perished in your world. It's simply too small to be of use. Sorry about that.
Peter asks, do you think that science and religion can ultimately truly coexist and be compatible?
Some people say no, but I say yes. It was Galileo who said that the purpose of science is to determine how the heavens go, but the purpose of religion is to determine how to go to heaven. So, in other words, science is about natural law, how the heavens go. But religion is about ethics, how to go to heaven. So, as long as people understand the difference between the two, there's no problem. They're complementary. The problem emerges, however, when people in the sciences pontificate about ethics or people in religion pontificate about natural law. That's when we might get into some problems. But as long as we keep these two realms separate, I think there's no problem. They're complementary.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the intersection between politics and economics. You've spoken about making sure that science is easily communicated to politicians in order to make it realistic. But do you think that we should be trying to separate the political world from the scientific world as much as possible?
I think we have to be realistic because, of course, somebody has to foot the bill. And scientists can be in their ivory tower as much as they want, but sooner or later, someone has to foot the bill. Now, when you look at the history of science, you realize that many of the great scientists were independently wealthy. They had the leisure time, they had the education, they had the leisure time to dabble in things like chemistry and so on and so forth. And it was no accident that Lavoisier, the great chemist, one of the fathers of chemistry, was beheaded at the French Revolution because of the fact that he was a member of the aristocracy and the revolutionaries thought of him as an enemy. So I think that scientists have to understand now that we don't live in the French Revolution anymore, but we have an obligation to be aware of the social impact of the technologies that we unleash on the world. And so scientists have to be more in tune with what's happening around them, and they simply can't be in an ivory tower.
We have an anonymous attendee who's asked, you've spoken a lot about how beautiful the God equation will be once it's been discovered. Out of all of the equations we've formulated so far, which do you deem to be the most beautiful?
Well, what is beauty? Beauty is, to a physicist, symmetry. And what is symmetry? When I take an object like a snowflake and I rotate it, the prongs of the snowflake rotate into themselves and it looks beautiful. So that's what beauty is. When I take an object, rotated it, or shuffle its components and it remains the same, that's beautiful. Why is E equal mc squared so beautiful? Because m, mass, turns into E, energy, in one equation. So E equals mc squared rotates m and E. Now, a theory of everything, just like a snowflake, should rotate all the particles of the universe into itself. So the universe itself becomes one gigantic snowflake, with each prong of the snowflake being a subatomic particle. What is the only theory or only symmetry that can do that? Something called supersymmetry. Supersymmetry takes the universe and rotates it into itself. And supersymmetry is the symmetry of the string. And so the string is not only the leading and only candidate for a theory of everything, it's also the most beautiful candidate for everything because it takes all the subatomic particles of the entire universe and rotates them into itself such that the equations remain the same. So that is the ultimate beauty. The ultimate beauty is when you have a snowflake such that all the prongs of the snowflake represent the universe and the thing rotates one universe into the other universe. That, to me, I think, is a criterion for a theory of everything. Now, some people say, give me an alternative. Let's say I don't like string theory. Give me an alternative. Well, at the present time, there is none. All other alternatives are shown to be anomalous, inconsistent, or they don't describe the standard model correctly. Many proposals for a theory of everything, for example, have no electrons, no protons in them, no matter, just a theory of space. And that's not enough. We want a theory that combines space with the theory of electrons and protons as well.
Professor Kaku, thank you. I'll finish with one final question, which we've been asking all of our speakers. If you could distill all of your knowledge and everything that you've learned into one thing for our members to take away, what would that be?
Well, Richard Feynman said that if he was on a deserted island and had only one theory to take with him, it would be the atomic theory, because from the atomic theory, you could begin to theorize about how the whole universe is put together. I would go one step beyond that and say that atoms in turn could be vibrations like music, and that people who are stranded on an island, if they want to rediscover Einstein, rediscover the Standard Model, they should deal with the theory of vibrating strings, because within strings is contained all of Einstein's theory of general relativity and the entire Standard Model as well.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you this evening, and I hope that you've enjoyed it too. To our members, for those of you who've signed up to our meet and greet, we'll see you very shortly. And to the rest of you, please do join us at 8 o'clock to meet Diane von Furstenberg, and have a lovely evening. Thank you so much.